Hi! This video is part of the series of videos I'm making where I document the process of how I am making the graphic novel, or actually the graphic memoir that I'm working on, titled Weerkaatsing. It's an Afrikaans title. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the mistakes or things that didn't really work out. I don't want to call them mistakes because they were part of the discovery process, and there were various reasons why I abandoned that avenue later on. So the first one that I tried and abandoned was embroidery. You can see in my visual journal here that, and this is way before I had any notion of actually what the memoir is going to be like. I haven't written the script at this stage. I haven't done any of the interviews. This was just my visual exploration phase. And you can already see during this phase that I was fascinated with textile artists and contemporary embroidery. There is so many exciting things that happen in embroidery, and I really liked the conceptual idea of embroidery as well, because of course in embroidery you use thread, and thread, you know, symbolically it's literally weaving through the material to together create a new image. And it's also connecting images with one another, objects with one another. It's a connection to the past. There's also a strong connection in embroidery as one of the crafts that were deemed sort of female in previous centuries. And there are contemporary artists who reclaim this as an art form, and that's just so fascinating to me. So here you can see on the left-hand side, I made some notes where I already said sort of how interesting that they work on different type of textiles, like transparent linen, and also sort of allowing some of the thread to be visible, to be loose, as you can see here and here. So the threading, sort of the backside being exposed. I kind of liked something about that also, symbolically, that we're unraveling the past and we're reclaiming it in a more balanced way. And like I also already said, I saw the thread symbolically as this link, a link between, a linking symbol, so a link between the present and the past, and a link between, it could be a link between other things as well. At this stage, as I said, I wasn't really sure where the story was going to go, so I didn't know what those symbols were going to be, but that's kind of where my mind went. And I found this textile artist from America, from Boston in the United States, Julieta Mao, and this all is images from her work. And what I found fascinating is that the linen that she worked on, that she chose to do her embroidery work on, is old linen. So it's already sort of yellowed out, you know, when linen gets really old, when it's had too many washes, too many jig on it, too many bleach on it. It goes so yellow, it has that weathered look, and it becomes even more fragile. Also symbolically how fragile the past is. There were just so many beautiful things symbolically that I could read into textile art. Also, she works with this, what she called it, a Chinese red thread, where she's always bound to the one that she loves. So in this work, that was part of that series. And she also called her work Autobiographical Embroidery. And this is a quote from Mao. She said, "I use my daily life as the main subject of my work, with the idea of the work being honest, even painfully so, coming from my desire to be true to my emotions, insecurities, strengths, and intelligence, without fear of ridicule or censure from a patriarchal society. By making work that resides within the realm of the everyday objects and the female, I am attempting to defy and contest masculine censure. In effect, I reclaim my femininity, the quality of being feminine, without the fear of losing strength or respect. Though the autobiographical drives the work and is necessary for it to exist, ultimately it is transcendent, enabling the viewers to have their own independent relationship to the work. Another thing that also was so fitting for me from this quote and her artist statement was that women from the 1930s and from the apartheid era in South Africa really didn't have a voice, and I wanted to explore that avenue possibly as well. But like I said, at this stage, I didn't know where it was going to go. And then the project developed and it became this story with two very distinct narrative voices. And I started to explore different mediums and then attach a medium to a narrative voice. So between chapter 4 and 5, there is a segue where there is a brief history of the language of Afrikaans and how that has such a wonderful, rich history, which clearly shows that it is an African language and it is a language in its own right. And then it got reclaimed through Afrikaans nationalism. So I wanted, because it was this different voice, I thought it would be symbolically nice to use a different medium. And therefore I wanted to use cloth and embroidery. So this page just shows you the layout for the drawing. And then here you can compare this was the testing page that I did. Just want to place them side by side. So this was the test page I did. I worked on a pure sort of linen, and it's a very white linen. I didn't want it to be too much a different color because I wanted it obviously to fit in with the rest of the graphic novel. And I used two different threads. This black thread, they were both black in color. This one is what is normally used for embroidery, and it's a quite thick thread. And then I also used a normal silk thread that's very thin for finer details. I'm going to zoom in so you can see where I added some of that finer detail. All right, so it's close up so you can see the two different threads being used. This is used for the thicker thread, and then these fine lines were made with the silk thread. I had mixed feelings about the result of the page. I'm just going to put it back, otherwise I have to hold it the whole time. I had mixed feelings about the result. On the one hand, I still really liked the symbolism thereof, but I obviously, and as you can see with this page, I had the problem of detail. There was no way that I was going to be able to achieve this kind of detail and this text detail in this page. And I'm using a lot of patterning in the novel as well, and I wanted to include some of that patterning here and here. And there was no way that I was going to achieve that kind of tonal value and detail that I wanted to. And that forced me to then leave areas blank, which I obviously then would have had to draw separately in pen anyway, and then scan these two separately and combine it digitally. And I think it could have been done. I think it might have worked. The downside to it was just it is very time consuming. And this is about 5 or 6 pages, this interlude. And I just realized that the project started to just grow and grow and become seemingly never ending. And because of that, just for practical reasons, I decided to not embroider the other pages and instead make it in pen and ink, because the pen and ink created that very nice stark contrast and it allowed for great detail, and it just became too busy as well, thinking about all the different mediums in one book. Here you can see on the left-hand side is the final pen drawing of that same page. And now you can make a nice visual comparison between the two, and you can just see the amount of difference in detail that I was able to achieve here versus on the embroidery on the right-hand side. And of course, this kind of patterning, I'm just going to move it up a little bit. This kind of patterning I would not have been able to achieve in the same kind of detail in the embroidery as I was able to in the ink. But the biggest is probably because of the time constraint. Typefaces, we all know by now, are not just mere words, but the typeface itself carries a history and carries a message. And it is a visual shape and it is a visual object. And in a graphic novel or on a comics page, you have the words and the images that are side by side, and they interact with one another and they influence one another directly. The words and what the words look like are just as important as the images themselves. So, and also there is a sort of a lettering history within comics that's very strong, and it has a strong connection to handwriting. Visually, it looks like it was handwritten. So of course, I wanted to use a typeface that would encapsulate that. And I wanted to, at the same time, have a visual metaphor for these two narrative voices within the type choices that I made. So I decided to design a typeface based on my written hand, and I thought that would be a nice touch and that would carry a lot of personal meaning to the narrative voice of the character Estè in the novel, or sorry, in the memoir. I have designed typefaces before. I've designed 2 typefaces before. I've used the program Fontographer for it. This shows you the first typeface that I designed, known as Soap Duck, and it was based on the, let me see if I can find it quickly. It's actually based on the little top of a can. No, not this, sorry. This is the vector. I drew a vector of that little, it's like on a soda can, the top lid of that can. That's what it looks like. So it was a found item, And from the found item, I used that as the starting point for making the typeface. This photograph shows you the typeface, the typeface as I cut out physically the words before I actually scanned them in and converted it into a digital version thereof. And this is just, let me show you, this is the waterfall of what that typeface looks like. Then the second typeface that I made, I also used a modular type of typeface. And I based it on the heart shape, and I created a typeface building it around that heart shape. So this is what all the letters of this typeface looks like. And then this is what it looks like in when it's installed. This is the waterfall. There are no uppercase letters for it. That's why this T looks so strange here. And this is just the font flag for that typeface. So I wanted to create a typeface based on my hand. So this time it would have been, my approach needed to be different. It wouldn't be a modular design kind of typeface. And it also was different in the sense that I used another program. I found this online program known as calligrapher.com, and you download this template and then you use that as the starting point for all the elements, the letter forms needed for the typeface. And in this one you needed uppercase and lowercase. So I initially did it on paper. You can print it out and then draw it by hand, but that was a little bit difficult when it came to the scanning process. That did not really work as well. So what I did was I drew it in Photoshop using a tablet and a stylus. And this is just what the various pages look like. And I must say, it's a lot easier to work in this program, online program, than it is to work in Photographer. And I would recommend it actually for anybody who wants to design a typeface. It's a very exciting process to see. Just want to see if I have... this is what the waterfall looks like. And it looks fairly decent. And here I like that you can see certain letter forms, the stems of them were thicker than other kind of letter forms. You can see this B and this F. It's a lot thicker than like this P, this T, and this J, and the L. But I like that kind of irregularity. So I was pleased with it up until this point, until I brought it into my layout actually in InDesign. So this is a page that is the narrative voice of Estè in this graphic memoir, and you can see it's set in Estè regular. I just named it after myself. And when I zoom in, that's what it looks like. So zoomed in, this became the problem with the typeface. I realized it really isn't a very effective body copy typeface. It looks fine at this size, but the moment it became its print size, which for this a graphic memoir, it has to be at 10 point. It has to be small enough to fit all the text in. It really became very, very busy. And let's just compare it to like another page. You can see how much more legible this page is at this size. When I zoom it in, it has a very nice high X height, and it absorbs actually quite a lot of space. So unfortunately, it just was something that, once again, pragmatically, it didn't work as efficiently as I thought it would. Conceptually, it was a great idea in my mind, and I think it still had merit in many ways, but practically it just did not. So the typeface I settled on as body copy. Oh, before I say that, it also is so clear that certain typefaces just are specially designed for body copy and they're effective for that, and others are not. And we have to be sensitive for that as well. And the typeface, coming back, the typeface I ultimately settled on for body copy was this Lambot casual type. And you can see here I set it at different point sizes. It's obviously not what the screen reflects. This is what it looks like. It'll be smaller when it's printed, but this is just so that you can see what it reads as and how you interpret it. So it's nice because it's a bold face. It absorbs quite a lot of ink, and it still has an irregular look. So it still seems as though it's a little bit influenced by handwritten hands, but it is at least a regular face, and it has a very strong baseline, and it just is a very beautiful typeface to work with. And I also decided to not use varying body copy typefaces for the two narrative voices, and to rather just use Lambot Casual throughout, because I'm actually also using a mixture of other kind of typefaces. Like many of the landing pages or the opening pages of each chapter, there is some written, hand-drawn type, and this type is varied. They differ for opening chapter to opening chapter. And then I also have other instances where I use for onomatopoeia and so on, where I actually use other typefaces like this Obelix Pro, which is also a comics inspired typeface. And I also used another typeface for the cover of the graphic novel. So sometimes, just for the sake of being pragmatic, we have to limit our typeface choices. It's so interesting, and it's true, sometimes things just sound great conceptually, the idea sounds great, but when you come into practice, you see very quickly what works and what does not work. And we shouldn't actually view these avenues, these dead ends, as mistakes. We should see it as part of a learning process, a very, very valuable process in working out what is the best route for your project.